Hello and welcome to Dev Roundtable. Um, this might come as a surprise, but Casey, what are you doing?
Welcoming you
We're
to
getting
Dev
this party
Roundtable.
started the right way.
Right. This just like I tried to make it better, but just like every time, it's going to be a horrible intro to edit. And also, maybe just like every time, unsurprisingly, Casey has some stuff to say, so he's going to kick us off.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I do. Yeah. Well, I mean, I was posting in Slack about I don't know. There's a lot of different ways we could take this, and I think anything is interesting. But I was thinking about CSS specifically. We don't have to talk specifically about CSS, but it might be a good jumping off point. But I don't know. Depending on where what spaces you occupy in the like wide world of web dev or programming in general, you may or may not have encountered people not really taking CSS very seriously. CSS, of course, being the styling and layout engine that you use when you're making a web page or a web app. And it's sort of notoriously a sort of tricky thing to get right. But that notoriety, I don't know why I said it like that, but that notoriety is, in my opinion, maybe a little outdated. And that's kind of what I was thinking about when I posted in Slack about this stuff. Is it's very easy to find people who don't take CSS seriously, or who sort of brush it off as like, oh, it's this unknowable weird thing, or like the way that you get a layout, like a designer gives you a Figma file or something. You're like, okay, well, I guess it's just time to go randomly generate some CSS until it looks sort of like the thing that I wanted, because CSS is impossible to do correctly, or whatever. And that's a pretty popular opinion. I don't think it's correct though anymore. And I think it's been about like maybe a decade or so since it was last a reasonable thing to say. So I will grant that for the first like 15, 20 years of CSS, there were a lot of gaps in CSS and a lot of things that were surprising about it, and a lot of inconsistencies between browsers. And, this kind of grew up around the same time that we were, as an industry, deciding that we wanted our web applications to be more and more like desktop applications or like native mobile applications. And we wanted to do more and more stuff that traditionally you would only attempt to do in like, a UI kit or something like that. So for the first little bit there, people were like, CSS is just wild. The only way that you ever succeed with it is by chance. But then we got Flexbox, and we got more cross-engine consistency, and we got a lot of these rough edges ironed out, and a lot of these gaps filled in native CSS, even without like preprocessors like Sass or whatever. But that opinion persists still, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, was where what does it take to get people to update their opinions about that sort of thing. And then another way we could take it is, what is the what sort of professional responsibility do we have as practitioners of building web software to like actually know and understand our tools, versus just throwing our hands up and saying, well, I know this stuff, this corner is just weird and I don't have to take it seriously. And those are open questions. I'm not staking out a position on them here at the outset. I'm just, I think it is interesting to discuss that sort of thing. I don't know if that was specific enough to kick off a conversation, but I'm going to stop talking now.
Nice. I don't know if you noticed me laugh when you said, what does it take to get people to update their opinions? It's like, I mean, I don't know if that's possible for the most people.
Maybe not. Yeah, maybe not.
But yeah.
I do have an opinion, actually. And I wonder if, so I've heard from when I worked with designers, like that they have this feeling that design is not taken very seriously, and it's kind of seen as this like murky area that like I don't know. And I wonder if CSS kind of overlaps with that, and that's why it has this opinion, and people kind of see it as like fluffy thing, and I don't need to, it's tricky to work with, and it's kind of like this gray, weird area in my head, and I just don't want to devote time to that. Those are my like initial knee jerk reactions to what you're saying, and I wonder if it's maybe coming from that place a little bit.
I think going off of that too, you also end up in like a self-fulfilling, can't get my hand out of my hoodie pocket and just keep gesturing. Um, you end up in like a self-fulfilling prophecy where people are like, oh, this is hard to write. You can't write it like a real language. You can't use good practices. Well, so then they obviously don't try, which just generates shitty CSS. And they're like, well, see, CSS is hard. It's impossible to use. It's hard to read. This is full of bugs. It's working badly. Well, you can't really write it well, so I'm not going to try. And well, if you're not putting effort into it, it's going to be pretty bad. And like,
Yeah,
no judgment. Things you don't put effort into largely turn out more poorly than if you put effort into them. Usually, like there's a curve. Um, I don't know. I feel like we've all been there too, right? I've written some very, very intense CSS where at the end I was like, oof, okay, no, we're just deleting that and restarting. But you just end up in this loop then where people don't put in effort, partially because they think it's hard and they don't understand it. So of course they don't. And then they write stuff that is hard to understand and doesn't work. And they're like, well, see, it's hard to understand and it doesn't work. And it just keeps looping. And I agree too that it's not that the designs, there are certainly designs that are hard to understand and translate. Like I have worked on designs where I'm like, okay, this is actually going to be quantifiably very, very challenging to implement. And then I go talk to the designer and say, hey, here's what's going on. Are there other ways to do this? But I think there's also less recognition of design as a skill, like you said, Amanda, but also that translating a design to good HTML first off, and like thoughtful HTML, and then applying thoughtful CSS to it, like those are themselves things you need to practice and put thought into so that then when you're doing your CSS, it can actually be thoughtful the same way when you're doing any other kind of programming. You're like, oh, I've got this data structure floating around. I need to start applying it. You have to put thought into that. You can't just slap it on a page and then run with it, at least not permanently.
I wonder to what extent, Max, I want to jump off from one of the things you said, which is the self-fulfilling prophecy idea of like CSS. I feel like, I mean, I think, I wonder if we can explore the idea of like, to what extent is this sort of thing true in different technical arenas? I feel like in CSS, maybe more so than in other programming languages, it's especially true that if someone comes before you and makes a mess for whatever reason, I won't get too personal about it. Maybe they were just under extreme time constraints, or like they didn't have the foundational knowledge of how to do it well and just felt like they needed to keep moving, or whatever. But for whatever reason, you are working in a CSS code base that has a lot of pitfalls, and your own ability, even if you are a person who takes CSS really seriously, is especially hindered by that kind of bad foundation in a CSS code base. I wonder if that's more true in CSS than in something else. Like if you inherit a Ruby code base that's like, was not stewarded very well before you got there, is it easier to kind of like carve out a place within that where you can do good work and start to spread that good work to the rest of the system than in a CSS code base? Or is it the same kind of thing, or we're just more aware of like refactoring techniques in other languages? Or I'm just curious to explore that idea, the
I
like
think part of it is,
self-fulfilling prophecy thing.
yeah, I think part of it is tooling. Like one thing, I think I've used one, I don't remember if it was a plugin or if it was like PHP Storm, so WebStorm, and then you slap a database on it. But I've used one tool in the past 7 years that looked through your HTML files when you were modifying CSS and was like, hey, the class name you just threw on in here in your HTML doesn't exist anywhere. And vice versa. Like, oh, you just added a class to your CSS. That doesn't exist. Or you're not using it anywhere yet. Or you misspelled this. Did you mean this? Which in most other languages is a pretty basic level of linting. It's undefined variable, right? Or something similar. Or you haven't imported this module, or namespace, or whatever organizational container O code of the day is, the thing in your language. And that really doesn't exist. And if I'm wrong, please tell me and save me so much pain in my life. That doesn't really exist for CSS. And when I've experienced it, it's been in HTML. When you start to get into other tools, and I mean this goes into a whole different can of worms. Those can exist to a degree because of CSS and JS, which opens up a whole different set of pitfalls as they try to fix CSS, and we can get into that, but I'm going to avoid that topic for the moment.
I embargo CSS and JS as a topic of discussion.
Right, and that's fine. But like when I found tools that sort of do that, it is only because they are leaning into JS. So it's not even CSS that is getting actually linked up there. And you can do that manually for every single class name you use by doing search. But okay, now talk about selectors. How do you actually search for selectors to see if that CSS is being used or unused? That's a harder problem, significantly. And so, like, I think at least part of it, when we start to talk about you're in something with either legacy CSS or just CSS that has a lot more pitfalls, like you said, and you're trying to do better, the thing I always run into is I feel like I am suddenly at a loss for the tools that I use for other basic programming because they're just not available in CSS. You can do some stuff like pull things into files. That's one. I tend to go a little hard that way. I like to pull everything into very, very small files, but even just have basic imports that you then pull into your main CSS file, like your nav styles, pull it into a CSS file. That can go both ways because now you've got styles that aren't obvious in your other thing, and the cascade becomes more unclear, and then the ordering of those files you import matters, and that kind of thing, but stuff like that.
Yeah, I think the tooling observation is a really astute one. I think, yeah, the notion. I mean, I am refactoring CSS code all the time, but I hardly even think the word refactoring when that's what I'm doing, the same way that I do when I'm refactoring some JavaScript or something. And it's an interesting idea of like, any CSS that parses is going to result in something as long as you're as long as the things that your selectors are targeting exist on the page. But I mean, you mentioned there are automated tools that can tell you like, hey, this isn't used, if it is at least like a class name or something. Now when it gets into more complicated selectors, that's basically like, well, now you have to simulate the whole application in order to know that. But yeah, beyond that, we start to get out of the realm of like a computer can tell you if you did achieve the same thing with two different blocks of CSS. Like their two different blocks of CSS are definitely going to both result in something, and contextually maybe they both result in like the look and feel that you wanted to achieve, but through like two different avenues. Like, maybe you swapped out, just a trivial example, you used to be doing some spacing with margins and now you're doing it with padding. And that's two different things. Like if you just inspect like the box model or whatever, you've done two different things. So the computer can't tell you like, yeah, you did a safe refactoring here. You have to take a look at it and be like, I did do a safe refactoring, but it's hard to know if you actually did, because maybe at runtime, the application can do things that you didn't expect when you were looking at that isolated bit. And there's no sense of like, there's no functional boundary or anything that you can do as cleanly as you can in like, I'm going to introduce a seam in this like big method in a Ruby class. And I know that nothing is going to get into. I've written a method over here, and I know for sure that nothing gets into it except arguments that I pass in. With CSS, it's like, I don't know. You can't really.
Right. What if that string gets super long? Not to mention responsive design. I mean, it's much harder to tack. I mean, oh man. There's another one, refactoring. Like, when you're refactoring, hopefully you have tests and everything is so much easier. And like you just said, how do you test? Like, again, there's some kind of automated stuff you could do, snapshots, but like those are going to be hell if you're diffing the literal DOM, because the whole point is hopefully you can change the DOM and the CSS and have it maybe look the same. You could do visual testing.
I do think tools like Storybook can help a lot with this. Like, you can get things a little more isolated because you're like, okay, this is my button component or whatever, and I've changed some CSS about that. But like, it helps to some extent. But this is kind of the unit testing problem too. The problems arise in the combination of your components most of the time. And if you're lucky, if you're having a fun day, maybe there is a problem that is isolated to just one component in your UI, and then you can have a fun time working in a really contained sandbox. But usually the problem is the interaction of a bunch of stuff composed. But yeah. And I think it's, it's interesting to think about going back a topic to the, like, how seriously do practitioners take this part of the craft as opposed to, compared to other parts of it, like back-end programming or whatever. Like, is that another self-fulfilling prophecy? Like, we don't have a lot of high-powered CSS tooling, there's plenty of CSS related tools like Sass and, other things of that nature, and JS in CSS. No, other way around, CSS in JS.
Oh, now we're talking.
Oh, yeah. Uno reverse.
As it's a scripting attack in your CSS. Anyway, never mind.
But yeah, like, there's this notion of a lot of programmers don't take front end work very seriously. And we also don't have a lot of the tooling that you employ when you are doing a serious job in backend code. There's sort of a chicken and egg problem there, maybe to some extent, of like, if we started out taking it really seriously, maybe we would have better tools because more people who are tool builders would be working in that space and thinking like, this would benefit from some more stuff. But then also vice versa, like, well, it's much harder to take it seriously because I don't just have I can't just like right click in my IDE and some really complicated stuff happens. I don't know where that breakdown is. I'm sure it's, some of column A, some of column B.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think you can definitely see that we don't take it seriously. When I was first learning about CSS, I think they had a diagram of a cake, and it was like HTML is the cake. And then if you want some fancy stuff on top of it, like CSS is your frosting. But it's like even our language of it, it's very much hungry. Like, here's a nice additive. Here's this thing that you might like to have with that, instead of like, you have Ruby, you have Rails, like these things connect, and you take them both very seriously. And they are their own in their own rights. I think Jim, I can't remember, I think there was another dev roundtable where he showed some tooling that it took like snapshots of where your website was, and then if there were some major changes to the CSS, it would show you like, hey, this part of your app is all messed up. And that's about the only tooling I've ever seen for CSS changes. And it almost kind of felt like RSpec for CSS a little bit to me. That's how it worked in my brain. But I can't remember the software that he was using.
Yeah, I think that too.
Yeah, I think one of the things about it being like the frosting on the cake is like, it's such a misnomer because like you can have a great app with a good user interface that has, and like with no CSS, like that, it won't look nice. Like it just won't. Um, it just won't. That's okay.
Well, there was this
I'm
notion.
stretching to be like, it's okay, because I don't know, is it? And like, not to like at all to demean like the importance of just like pure user experience without any like this is such a false dichotomy I'm already making, right? User experience with no design at all. Oh, okay. But like you can have like a really good backend schema and like a really thoughtful all of that, and that is hugely important, and it does make a really big difference to the end user at the end of the day. They're not going to want to use the app if it's Times New Roman with no padding. They're just not. Like the design matters massively. That's usually what they actually care about. They also care deeply about the experience, but like you can't just not like it's a really big part of the experience.
I'm gonna branch off here
Yeah,
into
yeah.
psychoanalysis of people that I don't know
Yes.
personally.
I love it. I'm so here.
There really is. I mean, I think just to get a little more accusatory about things, a big there is a sort of programmer mindset, which I'm not going to act like I'm completely innocent of this sort of thing either. But there's a real like, there's like this self-conception that I think that many programmers have of like, I just see the ones and zeros, man. Or like, that's what I look is like. It's the guy from the Matrix, and he's just got the code up. He's not running it through any kind of like video processing or anything. And he's like, you just get used to it. It's just the data, and that's how I interface with things, and that's the right way to do it. And some of that I think is good from like an engineering perspective and from a data design perspective and that sort of thing. But like, there's this current when web browsers were starting to grow up in the 90s, of user style sheets, right? Like we don't really do user style sheets anymore, but that was thought to be like, that's going to be how everyone consumes the web. When we started, is like, you're going to send me some HTML, some really unopinionated HTML. I get the data and then I look at it how I want, because I've brought my own style sheet, and like I just take this data and then I do what I want with it. Maybe I don't want to do anything with it. Maybe I just look at browser defaults. Maybe I have my own style sheet that I apply to everything that I want to read. And I think there are good parts to that kind of mentality of like, yeah, just give me the data and then I can do stuff with it. But to your point, Max, you can do that to an extent, but then also at some point, design has to come in and say like, this data does have a structure, and we're going to help you understand that structure. And there needs to be a visual component to that is like, yes, we're going to show this to you a certain way. And just as like a, back to the like accusing people of stuff thing there, I think that the people who see themselves that way are incorrect. I think that they are mistaken about their own self-perception. I think they like to believe that like the best possible world would be like, we're all just in terminals all the time and there's one font, and like I don't need any of that frilly shit, and I'm just like, yeah, I'm technical and I just want the data. And like, I don't think they're correct when they think of themselves that way. I think they do care about and benefit from sensible designs, and they're just not conscious of it until a design doesn't match what they wanted it to be, and then it doesn't match, and then what they conclude when something doesn't match their expectations is not, oh well, the design is different than what I wanted. They conclude design as an entire category of thing is no good. And I think that's a bad attitude, but a lot of people demonstrate that attitude. And just a personal example from work. This is not meant to call anybody out or anything like this. This kind of thing happens all the time. I've done it too. You guys have maybe done this. Who knows? But there was a request came in from someone who was trying to analyze some of the data in our application that our application wasn't visualizing particularly well. Like he was just looking at there's like a corner of the data that's in the API response, but isn't visualized super helpfully for the way that he wanted to look at it. And so the request came in, which was, I just want a tab that is just all of the JSON. Just give me all the JSON, because I just want to look at the data. I just want the data. That's going to be the best way for me to work with this. And uncritically, we took that request and we were like, okay, here's a tab that has all the JSON in it. And you, very data-minded person, are going to take a look at it and do what you want with that JSON. Guess how often that tab gets used? Never.
I will periodically decide that I want to like export all like my health data as raw or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna do stuff with it. Sometimes I do if it's a really easy metric, and most of the time I'm like, you know what? I want a nice graph. I want this done for me. I would like it to magically have the things I want on it without me doing anything. So I've got a glucose monitor and it's got constant thing. And actually, last night there was a server outage, which does not affect my actual monitor. I'm happy to report, like it continues to do the thing. I know. And for me, like it's a fine situation if it doesn't work. For others, it would absolutely not be. But that was my first thought. I'm like, server outage. I'm like, don't even. And I was like, okay, good. The little local loop between the monitor and my phone works because that's Bluetooth. But I have two apps for it. I have the one that comes with the monitor, which functions. It does have graphs. You can't do it, like you can't zoom on the graph. You can't like scroll your values. You can't do anything with the graph. You can't like get the number. You can just see the line. That is all. And so I have another app because of exactly that, where like this gives me raw data kind of. And then I have another app specifically that just interfaces via the API. So the other app wasn't working because of the outage. Because that one actually has things like, I don't know, like adding lines to your graph and letting you scroll values and use it with an actual user interface. And so that just makes me think of that whole thing where I'm like, sure, I've got all the data in this other thing and just this massive data dump. And I'm like, this is terrible. And I work with data every day. And I hate this. And I'm like, no, I want the cute one called Sweet Dreams. Like it's got like a little Halloween skin right now. So next to my blood sugar, there's a little spooky jack-o'-lantern. And I'm like, no, this is great. Give me this. And like, you can scroll and it's got all the little niceties. But I'm like, this is exactly why people are like, oh, I just want the data. I'm like, you probably don't, because for something like this, I also want an interpretation of the data, and that's the point of the app. I don't actually just want a constant stream of raw numbers. That's not actually useful to me. I want it to have notifications and alarms and things like that. That's the whole point. Otherwise, I don't know, why have anything? Why not just make people curl constantly? Everyone gets a terminal and they can curl.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why even have browsers? Like, if we're throwing it all out, throw out the browser, right? Like,
I've literally had coworkers say things like web browsers were a mistake.
I mean, I have, like, I don't know. While I'm writing CSS, not infrequently, I will also have the thought that web browsers were a mistake.
Right. Yeah. I mean, maybe they're right.
Right. But also, that is almost like, and I think I mentioned this in the Slack thread, like, not that there aren't issues in CSS. Of course there is.
Mm-hmm.
It exists, therefore it has flaws, such as like the world, not to get weird, but like it is also at the point where most of the time I mean, there's just flat out human error where I'm like, why isn't this working? Oh, that just doesn't work when applied in combination with this property. Like, oh, I can't position, like, I'm adding margin and it's display in line. This will never work. A lot of the time, the issues are things where I'm like, oh, there's a property that does this and I just don't know about it. Or, oh, there's a selector that will do this. I just don't know about it. Or, I am just using this wrong. Sometimes it is genuinely cross-browser stuff is a good example. It is actually different browser behaviors or something, but it is rarely actually that CSS is doing something wild and, in the language of C, this behavior is undefined. No, it's actually very defined. I might think it's weird, like margin collapse. But it is actually a part of the language and it is actually defined. And it sucks when you don't know that and you butt into it. Like, that's still super frustrating, but that doesn't mean the language is, like, wrong or faulty.
Yeah, there's such a huge difference. Such a huge difference between unknowable, which I think is how a lot of people conceptualize CSS, and knowable but weird.
Right. Like, margin collapse is my favorite example because I had a really, really, really bad day about it. And margin collapse is basically as if when you have margins in a certain situation next to each other, the browser is just like, hey, you just want one of those. It gets rid of one of the margins.
Yeah, it's surprising, and we could quibble about whether it was ever a good idea or not. But
right.
But it's known. You can learn it. You can find articles about it.
And before I knew about it, I was like, this is clearly a button, whatever. And then I found they're like, oh, it's margin collapse. And I'm like, well, that's terrible. I hate this. But it is actually a thing in the language. Do I remember it exists? Not until about, 30,
right, when you see it happening, you're like, what the? Oh, right.
That's a good old miss feature.
Mm-hmm. I want to add a little nuance to what I said a moment ago about, I am a big proponent of like open data and people having access to their data. Like if you're using a web app or whatever, I'm a huge fan of people being able to, like, I want to export all my data for my own personal use or because the platform's going to shut down or whatever. And I love it when public facing applications have public APIs that developers can work with. Like, I think that stuff is really, really good. But I think it's the case that sometimes programmers believe that what they want to do is only ever interact with that raw data. And I think they're mistaken about that because they're trying to get something done, and having someone's opinion about what's interesting about this and how do different parts of this data relate to one another, and how can you accomplish some kind of job that you had in mind with this data. Like, having that presentation is necessary, I think. But at the same time, I'm not saying that should be the only thing. I think a lot of time, I mean, I think that, back to my example, like the guy who wanted the tab that was just all of the JSON, he was onto something. Like, he wanted to do something that our opinions about the presentation weren't fulfilling. Like, it was really hard for him to accomplish that. And that's a reasonable thing to want. It's just that his next intuition was, well, just give me the data. And I'm like, okay, yeah, like, or we could do a little design here. But I don't think you shouldn't have the data. You should have that too. It's just that if you have access to that data, that's now a project. Like, doing something with that is another project. It's not like, that's not where you're going to be doing your day-to-day work with it.
Yeah.
I think this is the longest in my life I've been quiet. So this is.
I was just thinking.
Share some thoughts.
No, I just
these hot takes.
Partly because I think like everyone here does more like front end and interface and stuff than I do, and I have like good and bad reasons for that. I mentioned in the channel like what I said in Slack the other day, like, and I do this because I have a respect for it. Amanda thinks I'm going to take like 20 minutes right now, which might be possible.
Yes.
I have respect for it. I don't think it's like beneath me, but I said something like, this is why I don't like UI/FE. Like it's just too hard. Like I know algorithms and stuff. Like that's what I do. But I just need to say one thing about the browsers were a mistake. What do they want? Like Gopher? Like like at what point was it a problem? Was it do they want links? Like I just don't understand. Anyway, now back to what I was saying. But yeah, like there are definitely a lot of people, and I've been guilty of this in the past, maybe the recent past, but I hope to be much better about it. It's like, yeah, the rest of the stuff doesn't matter. It's like you need to do the things that make the stuff work. Like you need to do the back end, you need to do the data manipulation and all that. And it's like, well, yeah, that is important because without that, you get like, well, these are a bunch of, pretty pictures that you click on and maybe they do stuff or not, right? And that's maybe a valid way to look at it, but very few, especially those kind of people, don't think of it the other way, which is like, yeah, if all you do is the back end stuff, like, and there's no way to interact with it, what's the point, right? And that goes from all the way from like there's truly no way to interact with it, or like I made some kind of API and you can curl or whatever, or just like I'm slapping a bunch of raw data on the page, deal with it, to even like I made some shitty tables.
I think it can be another flavor of like functional programmer disease.
Yeah.
Where it's like you've carved out your own beautiful functional logic that's self-contained but does not interact with the rest of the world, and you feel like resentful about it when you do have to interact with the rest of the world.
Yeah,
I've had that day.
Yeah,
sure. Yeah. Who among us has not?
You're like, this is so good, and then someone's like, well, but so my interface needs, and you're like, no, it doesn't.
I totally get the whole like the beauty of pure functional stuff. Like, oh, this has no side effects. And it's like, but you need to get your head out of your ass at times and be like, here's some things that are known as side effects, like IO. Right? Like
IO.
Or all sorts of different like file IO, database stuff. Like these are all side effects, and like what is the point of what you're doing without this, right? Like it just reminds me of when I was in school and I learned assembly, and it's like normally you do hello world, right? Just like a printout deal. That printing out was like halfway through the semester. Like we were doing all sorts of stuff in a debugger because it's really difficult. It's very involved to print stuff out. So it's just like do an algorithm or do a bunch of stuff and then look at the debugger to look at the registers, right? Like, yeah.
I sure am computing.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. And like, it makes sense in that point because like it's difficult and you have to learn this stuff, but you can't do that with everything. That makes no sense.
Amanda, I want to know your hot take.
Wait, I got a little bit more. Just give me a tiny bit more.
I just don't want to forget about it.
I was quiet for so long. No, Max was saying, so a lot of I think the issue, some of it is like things that were true at a certain point and then never updated your opinions. And I feel like for better or worse, CSS still has a lot of like really weird opinions or really weird divides. Like we've talked a whole lot about like Tailwind and the whole semantic versus utility deal. I was doing a lot during the whole era of like, we don't use tables anymore, right? Like, but we still need to do tabular data all the time. So let's throw a whole bunch of divs all over the place. And now there's grid. Thank you. I love this. But like, there also is a whole lot of what was said of like just the complicated CSS stuff. It's like people like just using CSS to solve all the problems. And it's like, no, CSS goes on top of the presentation, on top of the HTML. Like, do good HTML, and then your CSS won't be ridiculous, or some of the selectors that are very confusing to deal with, right? Like, or error prone. Um, and I think I don't know about the div hole, but this is great. Um, this is also, like Max was saying something about, like, the back end of the data structure stuff is, you can get into a similar thing where people are just like, here's a data, I'm not going to think of the shape, I'm not going to do whatever. And then it's like, well, these algorithms are ridiculous or very hard or not performant because you're only looking at one half of the issue. And then I think finally, I think we'll have time for Amanda. Finally, like, I've done work in a good bit now in places that have like this front end back end divide, right? And it's like a whole different front end app or something. Um, and then like it's all API calls back and forth. And sometimes I think that's ridiculous, and sometimes I think it makes a whole lot of sense. Um, but like, you, even that sort of thing, like, you want to design those API calls and like what they take and what they return. And a lot of that has to do with, like, what is the design? Like, what is going to show up? Um, and some people are like, well, you don't have to think about this anymore because you can use GraphQL, right? And do that. I'm throwing everything out here.
Casey passes out from lack of options.
I'm sure you guys are really enjoying this. But at one of those places, I was working on GraphQL stuff, and like, you could run into the same sort of issue of, like, okay, with a simple REST API, you're just doing these things, but you want to get all this info, so now you're forcing somebody to make like 12 requests and put all the data together, right? Um, you can do the same. You can run into the same issue with GraphQL, right? Like, whether it's separate requests or just like you're forcing them to do something that's so nested and weird that it becomes a huge problem. So, and like, how do you know how to do this right? Like, you swallow your misbegotten pride, and you're like, what is the interface supposed to be? What is the design supposed to be? How do we do this right? Because that's part of what you do. Like, it doesn't matter if you're just like, okay, a bunch of cool shit is going on in the background. And that's my whole thesis that I spent a bit of time talking about. And I definitely want Amanda's hot take, but I also at some point need to know about all the laughter Casey and Max were doing.
That was not laughter.
That was us suppressing long hot takes.
Yeah.
Many additional takes were contained by those gestures. That's what that was.
Okay, good. Amanda, if that's where you are.
Sure. This might get people to flip some tables. We'll see. But I have a gender and women's studies degree, which I don't know if is a known fact. And all of this conversation just really makes me, I hear my old professors in my ear. But it makes me wonder, because software development is a very male-dominated field, and design is a very female-dominated field. And it makes me wonder if, societal expectations, sexism, I'll drop the big S word, is playing into it. And, it's like, even through this whole conversation, all of us were like, freely design and like, doesn't matter over here. And, data, especially when Casey was doing his like gym bro, data bro voice. I was like, oh yeah, that's really hitting it home for me. I don't know, but it brings all that up, and it just makes me wonder if it's like, because this side is so male dominated, if it gets more credit and it gets more swing and it gets more, I don't know, like credit, I guess. I'm blanking on the word that I want to use for it, but
cachet.
Yeah.
I agree 1,000,000%
Yep, absolutely.
I think it is a
Absolutely.
super, super gendered issue.
Yeah.
And
I
people get real weird about it when it gets brought up. And I'm like, well,
Oh
fuck
yeah.
you, don't be
yeah.
sexist. Problem
I mean,
solved.
yeah. Look around. Also, now I feel like a real jerk for making Amanda wait. Well, I'm like, oh, there it is. No, I need to talk first.
Quote
Um,
Yosef, hold on, honey.
Forgot to
uh,
filter that out and put that at the beginning of the video.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I
I'm
mean,
gonna get
what's that?
canceled.
The stingers? Like we could do all that. Um, exactly. I mean, you're the
Yeah.
producer. I'm
No,
just some guy.
you're completely on track with that, Amanda. It's absolutely, and this gets talked about. I mean, even when I was doing my graphic design program at MATC, like none of my classes were explicitly about like gender or dynamics in the workplace or anything like that, but it comes up all the time. People are like, you're gonna have men who don't like the fact that this is like a thing that matters. Uh, and yeah, absolutely. I think there's the closer you get to design, the more feminine it is seen, whatever you are doing, and the less seriously it is taken. Now, what's the causal relationship there? It's complex, obviously. Of course, that. Um, is it taken less seriously because it is closer to what is seen as the feminine? Probably not exclusively, but it certainly contributes. I think it's a big part of it. Both because of the populations of practitioners, and then conversely, just the craft itself is seen as more feminine or more masculine.
Well, and when you look online and start to see the folks who are talking about good CSS practices versus the folks who are uh, excited about new or creating new CSS and JS libraries, the split becomes a little obvious as well.
It's a good
That
point.
reminds me of one thing that I didn't get to is there like if I'm going to be a little generous, which I kind of don't want to be, but I will still say, like, there's something about like a different paradigms, like to a lot, like, because CSS there's like a different sort of thought process and a different sort of like understanding that goes there, like as opposed to uh, programming in especially like an imperative language. I mean,
Sure, it's a different
I still have
language. Yeah.
trouble with like I'm again, I'm not putting it down like it's beneath me. It just confuses me, and I'm a bear of little brain. Like the JS large async model, and I'm just like, I just want things to happen. I don't need to deal with promises or callbacks. Stop. Like especially because I'm doing back end stuff, right? And not like I understand in a front end world where you're like, I don't know, you're waiting for like a button to be pushed or something and you need, but like I'm trying to just like grab some data from a database, and of course I need to wait until I have the data.
The
Like,
front end
don't.
world isn't happy about promises on like async
Yeah.
await either, for the
Okay.
record. Don't blame us. Don't blame us.
I wasn't trying to blame you. I was just saying that like in my,
I know, I'm
again,
just
my
teasing.
little brain, it makes more sense in the front end deal because you're like more interrupt driven or reactive or whatever. But like similar, like there's a little bit of my understanding that's like similar to when people are moving from a language that is like closer to what they understand, whether it's like object oriented or imperative or whatever, and then they go into like a functional language or a logic based deal, and they're like, how do I make things happen? This is, and like they either just don't get it and get frustrated, or they do stuff really badly, right? And then CSS to me has some of that kind of feeling because you're not saying I want this thing to happen exactly this way. It's a lot of times you're like, well, here's a selector, right? And especially when you get into some of the weird ones like the sibling or like nth child or whatever, And some of the deals where you're like actually building stuff up, right? Like this is going to have 5 classes on it that all work together. It's just like, what? Why can't I just say, do this? You element, do this, right? Yeah.
Will it
I
help
feel
your
like there's maybe a little bit there, but
will it help your mental model if I tell you that CSS is just Prolog for rectangles?
I love it. Because I love
It's too bad
Prolog.
Chris isn't on this call.
Yeah. Well, hey, I love Prolog.
I didn't say you didn't. I was just saying Chris also loves Prolog.
No,
Multiple people
only
can love
one
Prolog,
person at
it's fine.
Flagrant can love Prolog, so we're gonna have a fight. And rectangles are they're not bad. Not bad.
We have a joke in our house that Finn thinks humans are really dumb because all we do is interact with rectangles all day.
Yeah.
Finn might be
Obsessed
onto
with
something.
rectangles.
Rectangles,
Just saying.
they're not even balls. What the heck?
I think Finn is right.
He is right, yeah. He is.
No disagreement.
What about rhombuses? Are we into this?
I heard rumpus.
Rhombus?
What did you say?
Wait, what's the first vowel
Rhombus,
there?
which makes me think of rhombus.
Rhombus. That's
Although I like the idea of a
rhombus.
a rumpus. It's like the hootenanny shindig stuff we were talking about earlier. Yeah, I guess I haven't said that word out loud in a really long time.
Seems reasonable.
Yeah. What about parallelograms?
Sure.
Cool.
Love them. Big
Love
fan.
'em. Nice.
Yes.
I feel like we can prologue this whole thing. Like what's what.
We're like one step away from making a shapes tier list.
Yeah. That'll be our next Dev Roundtable, rating shapes.
Yeah, rectangles, S tier, easy.
Yeah. Square you would think is S tier because it's a type of rectangle and
B
it starts
tier.
with S.
Yeah.
Yeah. B at best.
Yeah.
It's not a rectangle, so.
Triangle is true S tier. Is there something above S tier? Because that's where triangle would be.
S plus.
Yeah.
S plus.
We might need to do a bracket next time. Figure this out.
Shapes
Ooh.
bracket, yeah.
I'm here for this. We can make a match for it.
After a couple of years of attempted erudition, Dev Roundtable has devolved into arguing about which shape is best.
Yeah. I'm actually looking forward to what's after that, where it's graph stuff, because the graph bracket is gonna really make me happy.
Are we talking about the graph of the bracket or a bracket of graphs?
You figure it out.
Okay, that's fair. What kinds of graphs?
Well, bracket is a type
line
of graph.
versus pie chart.
What if we
versus...
decide on a different graph for the bracket?
Great Dev Roundtable, guys.
Is it
Well,
still a
that's
bracket?
time.
Is it still a bracket?
Okay, everyone. First of all, enjoy how Amanda turned out to edit this one, and we'll see you next Dev Roundtable.